Amy Goodman, as we turn to the sprawling detention system within this country that some have likened to a gulag and a series of domestic Guantanamo Bays, the immigration prisons that over 300,000 pass through each year. Earlier this month, a 34-year-old Chinese computer engineer named Hiu Lui Ng overstayed his visa, died in a Rhode Island immigration detention facility. He had cancer in his liver, in his lung, and his bones. He had a fractured spine. Despite repeated complaints of severe pain, Mr. Ng was refused independent medical evaluation by immigration officials. The New York Times reported this. Instead, he was taken in shackles to another prison 2 hours away, where an immigration officer tried to convince him to withdraw his appeals and accept deportation. Before Jason Ng, his American name, died on August 6th, he told his sister the doctors at the Donald W. Wyatt Detention Center in Rhode Island had told him to, quote, stop faking his illness. Jason Ng's story is the latest in a series of similar cases of neglect and abuse at the hands of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, known as ICE. Investigations by the Washington Post, the New York Times earlier this year revealed as many as 83 prisoners have died in or soon after ICE custody in the 5 years since the agency was created in March of 2003. When contacted for response, ICE said they could not comment on Jason Ng's death because it's under investigation. Congress is responding to these deaths with legislation aimed to improve conditions for non-citizens in ICE custody. Congressmember Zoe Lofgren from California and Senator Robert Menendez of New Jersey have sponsored the House and Senate versions of the Detainee Basic Medical Care Act of 2008. We're joined right now by Joshua Bardavid, attorney for Mr. Ng's family. We're also joined by California Congressmember Zoe Lofgren, and we welcome you both to Democracy Now! Before we go to the legislation, Joshua, tell us the full story of Jason Ng. Where was he born? How did he come to this country?
Jason was born in Hong Kong, and he entered with his family at the age of 17. They applied for political asylum. Unfortunately, a notice telling them to go to court was mailed to a non-existent address. So an immigration judge had ordered Jason deported in absentia, unknowingly. Meanwhile, he went to school in the United States, graduated high school, went to college, graduated college, became an engineer working at the Empire State Building. He married, had 2 U.S. citizen children. He married a U.S. citizen, and he applied for his green card. When he went for his interview, instead of having his green card adjudicated, he was picked up. This was in July of 2007.
Wait, so when he and his wife went to the green card interview?
Correct, correct. What they thought was their final interview to get his green card, that he would finally become a lawful permanent resident of the United States. He was picked up and swept into this system.
If he hadn't applied for the green card, would he ever have been picked up? And he'd been here for so many years, gone to college, was working here.
It's possible that he would have been picked up. It's possible that he would have lived his life not knowing that he had an order of deportation pending against him and not been touched. But the fact that he was trying to legalize his status was actually what put him into this system. Unfortunately, the system is sprawling. And he was first sent to a facility up in Massachusetts. I'm sorry, he was actually first sent to Rhode Island. Then he was moved to a facility in Massachusetts, then to Vermont, and then back to Rhode Island. From July 2007 until August 5th or August 6th, the day that he passed away.
Well, let's talk about what happened when he went into the detention facility. Was he healthy as far as he knew when he went in?
He was a healthy, robust man.
34.
34, no history of medical problems.
Very tall?
Average height, and he was slowly deteriorated as he was through the various facilities.
How long was he held?
He was held from July 2007 until August 5th or August 6th. He died in the middle of the night, about a year, a little over a year. During this process, he had a stay of deportation because the courts were reviewing his deportation order, the fact that he was eligible for a green card, and immigration had not yet fully adjudicated his green card because instead of adjudicating it, they had detained him. During this process, he began to complain of various medical problems. In April of 2008, he had a steep decline. In a 10-week period, he dropped 23 pounds. At this point, he was in St. Albans, Vermont, in a facility that had absolutely no medical facilities whatsoever, not even a nurse on duty. He was then transferred to the Donald Wyatt facility in July, I believe July 2nd.
In Rhode Island.
In Rhode Island, excuse me, yes. July 2nd, 2008.
This a public prison?
It is a private prison. It's owned by a private corporation that only owns the Donald Wyatt facility. It had been owned by a major publicly traded corporation, Cornell Corrections, until, I believe, June of 2007. And then it was transferred to this private corporation, the Donald Wyatt Detention Corporation, that owns the facility. The reason that he was moved from Vermont to Rhode Island was because the Vermont facility did not have any medical care facilities at all. Donald Wyatt supposedly had adequate facilities to provide for his care. Unfortunately, he was given basic medical evaluations. He was not given an MRI. He was not given a CAT scan, despite the fact that he was complaining of loss of feeling in extremities, despite the fact that he lost 23 pounds. At this point, he had now dropped about 30 to 32 pounds. And he was given just basic medical evaluation.
They put him on a top bunk? They had double bunk?
That's correct.
So that he would have to climb up and down?
Correct.
But he was complaining of extreme back pain.
Right, and at various stages, complete loss of movement in his feet and his legs, and loss of feeling in his legs. Eventually, he was given a bottom bunk and some painkillers, and given a basic medical evaluation. But at this point, he was unaware that he had cancer. We're unsure when he had a fractured spine. It may have occurred when he was moved by the ICE officials on July 30th. We don't know when the fractured spine occurred. It's possible at this point he did have a fractured spine. He was not given a wheelchair despite repeated requests by his attorneys, by his family, by him, by his cellmate. He was cleared to walk with a cane, is what we were told.
Why was he taken on a 2-hour ride to Hartford, Connecticut?
It's not really clear, and that's one of the many unanswered questions in this case. When it became clear that we were not going to be able to get through basic requests, the medical care that was clear he needed, we filed a petition for writ of habeas corpus seeking his release under due process grounds because he was not receiving adequate care. This was filed on July 29th in Rhode Island. The very next day, he was taken in shackles in a van and driven 2 hours to Connecticut, where a deportation officer met with him and said that the only way they would release him or deport him is if he withdrew all of his appeals.
Did he?
No. He actually had become so desperate that he started to discuss that with his family members. At this point, communication was quite difficult because he couldn't use a phone and he was not given a wheelchair.
Why couldn't he use a phone?
Because he couldn't walk to go to the payphone, and they wouldn't give him a wheelchair to go to the payphone, and they wouldn't give him a wheelchair to meet with us as attorneys. So he was communicating through other Chinese-speaking detainees, although on the 30th we were able to speak with him on the phone. And at this point, he began discussing withdrawing all his appeals. And to give you an idea of just how much pain he was in and how much suffering he was going through, this is a man with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old child, with a U.S. citizen wife, who's lived more of his life in the United States than he did in his home country in Hong Kong. And he was considering giving all of that up and accepting an order of deportation, even though it's our opinion that he was legally eligible for a green card, simply because he needed the suffering to end.
When did the prison tell him he was faking it?
That happened on several occasions. Just to correct you, I don't believe it was a doctor who, in fact, accused him of faking it. I believe it was a nurse and several of the guards who said, you know, you're exaggerating your condition, you're exaggerating your condition.
Where exactly did he die?
He died in the hospital in Rhode Island.
In the detention hospital?
No, they had taken him to an outside hospital. What happened was on the July 31st, we had a hearing before district judge in the District Court of Rhode Island. And the district judge, while he didn't rule on whether or not to release him, he, at the end of the hearing, said, if this guy needs a wheelchair, get him a wheelchair. If he needs an MRI, get him an MRI. And the U.S. attorney, who was quite proactive at this point, only became involved in the case when we filed the petition on July 29th, assisted us in contacting the prison authorities and making sure the next day he was brought to a hospital for a CAT scan. And it was then and only then that it was discovered that he had cancer basically all over his body, that he had a fractured spine, and we were told it was terminal. And he remained in the hospital for the next 3 days, and he passed away on the night of August 5th, August 6th.
Was his family with him?
They were able to see him on the final day. It took a little over 2 days for us to get clearance. The prison wanted, and ICE officials wanted, the Social Security numbers of his family in order to permit them to visit Jason. But we were finally able to get clearance so they could be with him at his side.
California Congressmember Zoe Lofgren is with us now. She doesn't represent his area, but has introduced federal legislation around medical care for immigration prisoners, for immigration detainees. Can you talk about the bill you've introduced and how it would affect, well, someone like Jason Ng if he were still alive?
Sure. I chair the subcommittee on immigration in the House of Representatives, and we've had 2 hearings on the conditions, medical conditions in